The invitation had arrived 3 weeks ago, tucked inside a cream-colored envelope that felt expensive to the touch. Lisa Chen had almost thrown it away, thinking it was junk mail, but her friend Rachel had been so excited when she handed it over during their weekly coffee meetup. "You have to come with me," Rachel had insisted, stirring her latte with unusual enthusiasm. "It's the Riverside Music Academy Gala. I know it's not really your scene, but I need a familiar face there." "Please?" Lisa had hesitated. A fundraising gala at one of the city's most exclusive music schools? That definitely wasn't her world. She spent her days teaching piano to kids at the West Side Community Center, where the instruments were old and sometimes missing keys, and where half her students couldn't afford proper lesson books. But Rachel worked in the academy's administration office and rarely asked for favors, so Lisa had agreed. Now standing in the marble-floored lobby of the Riverside Music Academy, Lisa was seriously questioning that decision. She tugged at the hem of her simple black dress, bought on sale from a department store last year. Around her, women glided past in designer gowns that probably cost more than her monthly rent. Men in tailored tuxedos chatted easily, champagne flutes in hand, discussing vacation homes and investment portfolios. Rachel had disappeared 15 minutes ago to help with some last-minute emergency in the kitchen, leaving Lisa to fend for herself. She moved slowly through the crowd, trying to look like she belonged, even though every instinct told her she stuck out like a sore thumb. The main hall took her breath away, though. Crystal chandeliers hung from vaulted ceilings, casting warm light over everything. Large paintings decorated the walls, and in the center of the room, positioned like a jewel on display, sat the most beautiful piano Lisa had ever seen. It was a grand piano, its black surface so perfectly polished she could see reflections dancing across it. Even from a distance, she could tell it was something special. She found herself drawn to it, weaving through clusters of chatting donors until she stood just a few feet away. The craftsmanship was incredible, the wood grain visible along the edges, the brass pedals gleaming, the keys that seemed to call out to her fingers. She knew enough about pianos to recognize serious quality when she saw it. "Beautiful, isn't it?" A woman in a red dress appeared beside her, also admiring the instrument. "It's a 1920 Steinway. They say it's worth over $200,000. Lisa's eyes widened. $200,000. She could fund her community center's entire music program for years with that kind of money. Could buy new instruments for every student, fix the leaky roof in the practice room, hire another teacher. "Do you play?" the woman asked. "I teach piano," Lisa replied, then added quickly, "at a community center on the west side." The woman's smile remained pleasant, but something shifted in her eyes. That subtle change Lisa had learned to recognize over the years. The moment when people reassessed her, placed her in a different category. "How nice," the woman said, her tone suggesting it was anything but. She drifted away a moment later, pulled into conversation with someone who apparently mattered more. Lisa sighed and moved to the refreshment table, picking up a glass of sparkling water. She found a spot near the wall where she could observe without being too obviously alone. The crowd seemed to know each other, greeting one another with air kisses and enthusiastic hellos. They talked about their children at boarding schools, about trips to Europe, about symphony performances and art gallery openings. A burst of laughter drew her attention to a group gathered near the piano. At the center stood a tall man in his mid-50s, silver hair perfectly styled, wearing a tuxedo that fit him like it had been made specifically for his body. Because it probably had been. He held a whiskey glass and seemed to be entertaining his audience with some story, gesturing broadly as he spoke. "And I told him," the man was saying, his voice carrying across the room, "you can't just buy your way into understanding classical music. It takes years of training, of discipline. These nouveau riche types think they can snap their fingers and suddenly appreciate the finer things in life." His companions laughed, nodding in agreement. Lisa felt her jaw tighten. She'd heard variations of this speech before, from people who thought art and culture belonged only to those who could afford the price of admission. The man continued, warming to his subject. "The problem with society today is that everyone thinks they're an expert. Everyone thinks they have taste. You know what I mean? They listen to their pop music and their simplified versions of classical pieces, and they think they understand what real music is about." One of the women in his circle caught sight of Lisa standing nearby and whispered something to the man. He glanced over and Lisa felt his gaze sweep across her, dismissive and cold. She recognized him now. Richard Pemberton. She'd seen his name on the Academy's board of directors list. Old money, Rachel had mentioned. His family had been donors for 3 generations. Richard's attention returned to his group, but his voice grew slightly louder, as if he wanted to make sure certain people could hear. Take this evening, for example. I'm sure there are people here tonight who've never even been to a proper concert, who wouldn't know Mozart from Beethoven if their lives depended on it. But they come to these events, drink the champagne, and pretend to belong. Lisa's face grew warm. Was he talking about her specifically or just people like her? Either way, the message was clear. She didn't belong here. Her simple dress, her lack of expensive jewelry, her background all marked her as an outsider. She considered leaving. Rachel would understand. But something kept her rooted to the spot. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the years of dealing with people who underestimated her, who thought that because she chose to teach in a poor neighborhood instead of at a prestigious institution, she must not be good enough for better. The evening's coordinator, a stressed-looking woman with a headset, appeared at the front of the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, if I could have your attention, please." The crowd gradually quieted. "We have a slight situation. Our scheduled performer for this evening, Maestro Chen from the San Francisco Symphony, has been delayed due to flight complications. We're working on the problem, but in the meantime, please continue to enjoy the reception." Disappointed murmurs rippled through the crowd. People returned to their conversations, but the energy had shifted. The piano sat silent and waiting, that gorgeous instrument with no one to play it. Richard Pemberton's voice rose above the chatter. "Well, that's unfortunate. Though I suppose I could fill in if needed. I've been playing since I was 5. Studied under Harrison Webb himself." He said the name like everyone should be impressed. Some people were nodding appreciatively. Lisa knew the name. Harrison Webb was a respected teacher, though from what she'd heard, his students often had more money than talent. But she kept that thought to herself, taking another sip of her water and wishing Rachel would come back. She glanced at the piano again, her fingers itching. It had been years since she'd played on an instrument like that. Her own piano at home was a beaten-up upright she'd bought second-hand. The community center's pianos were even worse, donated cast-offs that she spent her own money maintaining. To sit at a Steinway like that, to feel the keys respond with perfect precision, to hear the rich tones that only an instrument of that caliber could produce. But this wasn't the place for her. These weren't her people. She was just Rachel's +1, an outsider looking in on a world that had made it very clear she wasn't welcome. The invisible walls were as solid as the marble floors beneath her feet. Still, she couldn't stop looking at that piano, couldn't stop imagining what it would be like to make music on something so perfect. The crowd continued their conversations. Richard Pemberton continued his self-important commentary, and Lisa Chen stood quietly in the corner, unnoticed and underestimated, with no idea that everything was about to change. Rachel finally reappeared, looking frazzled but relieved. "Sorry about that. Kitchen drama. You doing okay?" She looked at Lisa with concern. "You look uncomfortable." "I'm fine," Lisa lied. "Just not really my crowd. I know, and I appreciate you coming. Just hang in there for another hour or so, okay? After the performance, we can sneak out early." Rachel squeezed her arm and rushed off again, pulled away by someone needing her attention. Lisa moved closer to the piano, drawn to it despite everything. She studied the details, the way the light reflected off its surface, the expert craftsmanship visible in every curve and joint. Her hand reached out, almost involuntarily, stopping just inches from the keys. She didn't dare actually touch it. "I hope you're not thinking of touching that instrument." The voice came from behind her, loud and sharp. Lisa turned to find Richard Pemberton standing there, that same dismissive expression on his face. His group had followed him over, and now they formed a small audience for whatever was about to happen. "It's a 1920 Steinway," Richard continued, speaking to her like she was a child, "worth more than most people's homes. These instruments are incredibly delicate. They require a specific touch, specific knowledge, not something just anyone should be handling." Lisa felt her face flush. "I wasn't going to touch it. I was just admiring it." "Of course." Richard's smile didn't reach his eyes. "I'm sure it's quite impressive to someone not familiar with fine instruments. But you see, pianos like this are investments. They need to be treated with the utmost respect and care. One of the women in his group giggled, covering her mouth with her hand. Lisa wanted to disappear, to sink through the floor. She took a step back from the piano. "No harm done," Richard said, his tone magnanimous, as if he'd just prevented some disaster. "Most people at these events don't really understand the value of what they're looking at. That's why we have velvet ropes at museums, you know." More laughter from his group. Lisa's hands clenched at her sides, but she said nothing. What could she say? That she'd been playing piano since she was 4 years old? That she'd spent her entire childhood and teenage years practicing for hours every day? That she'd been accepted to Juilliard with a full scholarship? None of that mattered here. To these people, she was just someone who didn't belong. Richard turned back to his group, warming to his subject. "You know what the problem is these days? Everyone thinks they're special. Everyone thinks they have talent. I blame those television shows, those competitions where they tell every contestant they're amazing. It creates this false sense of confidence." He gestured toward the piano with his whiskey glass, liquid sloshing dangerously close to the rim. "Real musicianship is rare. It takes natural ability, yes, but also years of proper training, private lessons with respected teachers, performance experience in the right venues. It's not something you can just pick up at a community class or YouTube tutorial." Lisa felt her anger building. She recognized the type. The kind of person who believed excellence was something you could only achieve if you had money. As if dedication and hard work didn't matter unless it came with the right pedigree. "Take me, for instance," Richard continued. "I started lessons when I was 5 years old, studied under Harrison Webb, one of the finest teachers in the country, performed at Carnegie Hall when I was 16. That's the kind of background that produces real skill." He paused, making sure everyone was listening. Not these weekend hobbyists who think watching a few videos makes them musicians. One of the men in his circle raised his glass. "Well said, Richard. Standards are important." "Exactly." Richard was on a roll now. Standards. That's what's missing today. Everyone gets a participation trophy. Everyone's told they're talented. But real talent? Real skill? That's something you're either born with or you're not. And if you're lucky enough to have it, you need the proper training to develop it. He looked around the room, his gaze passing over Lisa again, as if she were part of the furniture. "I look at events like these and I can always tell who belongs and who doesn't. Who understands what we're celebrating here, and who's just here for the free champagne." His group laughed again, that knowing laughter of insiders sharing a private joke. Lisa's hands were shaking now, but not from nervousness. From rage. From years of dealing with people like Richard Pemberton, who thought that money equaled worth, who couldn't imagine that real artistry might exist outside their exclusive circles. The coordinator appeared again, this time looking genuinely distressed. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'm afraid I have an update. Maestro Chen will not be able to make it this evening. His flight has been canceled. We sincerely apologize for the inconvenience." A collective groan went through the crowd. People had paid serious money for tickets to this event, expecting world-class entertainment. The coordinator continued. "We're exploring options for rescheduling, but for tonight I'm afraid we won't have our planned performance. However, please continue to enjoy the reception, and we hope you'll understand that these circumstances were beyond our control." Richard set down his glass with a decisive clink. "Well, we can't let the evening be a complete disappointment. I'll perform something." He announced it loudly enough that half the room could hear. People turned to look. "Richard, how wonderful," one of the women gushed. "We'd be delighted." The coordinator looked relieved and grateful. "Mr. Pemberton, that would be incredibly generous of you." Richard waved his hand modestly, but Lisa could see the satisfaction on his face. This was exactly what he'd wanted, the chance to be the center of attention, to demonstrate his superiority. "It's the least I can do. After all, these people came expecting music, and music they shall have." He walked to the piano with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. The crowd gathered around, forming a loose semicircle. Lisa found herself pushed to the back, which was fine with her. She considered leaving, just slipping out quietly while everyone's attention was elsewhere, but something made her stay. Maybe curiosity, maybe that same stubborn streak that had kept her at the community center when other opportunities had come along. Richard settled himself at the piano bench, adjusting it with unnecessary flair. He flexed his fingers dramatically, like a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. Then he launched into Bach's Prelude in C major, one of the most commonly played pieces in the classical repertoire. His playing was technically correct. The notes were all there in the right order, at approximately the right tempo, but it was lifeless, mechanical, like listening to a computer program execute instructions without understanding what they meant. There was no soul to it, no emotion, no sense that the music was anything more than a series of finger exercises. Lisa could see other people in the crowd shifting uncomfortably. A few exchanged glances. But when Richard finished, they all applauded politely because that's what you did at these events. You applauded regardless of quality, as long as the performer had the right last name. Richard stood and gave a small bow, eating up the attention. "A little rusty," he said with false modesty. "Haven't played in public in a while. But you see what I mean about proper training? That kind of technical precision doesn't come from amateur classes." He returned to his group, accepting their congratulations and compliments. "See?" he said, loud enough for Lisa to hear. "That's what real skill looks like. Years of proper training, not something just anyone can do." Lisa felt something snap inside her, not dramatically, but like a thread that had been pulled too tight for too long. She'd spent the entire evening being made to feel small, being dismissed and underestimated, watching this arrogant man use music, something she loved with her entire soul, as just another way to show off his wealth and status. Before she could talk herself out of it, she started walking toward the coordinator. Her heart pounded in her chest. Her hands were still shaking, but now it was from adrenaline rather than anger. The coordinator was speaking with one of the board members when Lisa approached. "Excuse me," Lisa said, her voice quieter than she'd intended. She cleared her throat and tried again. "Excuse me, I could play something. If you need someone." The coordinator turned, looking confused. "I'm sorry, what?" "I play piano," Lisa said, forcing the words out. "I could perform something. For the guests." The coordinator's eyes swept over her, taking in her simple dress, her lack of jewelry, her obvious outsider status. Lisa could see the doubt forming. "That's very kind of you to offer, but I'm a piano teacher," Lisa interrupted. "I've been playing for 24 years. I can play something appropriate for the event." The coordinator hesitated, clearly torn. On one hand, she needed to salvage the evening. On the other hand, what if this unknown woman embarrassed herself in the academy? "I'm not sure. What would you play?" "Rachmaninoff," Lisa heard herself say. "Prelude in C-sharp minor." The coordinator's eyebrows rose. That was not an easy piece. It was technically demanding and emotionally complex. Something that separated amateurs from professionals. "That's quite ambitious." "I can do it," Lisa said with more confidence than she felt. The coordinator looked at her for a long moment, then made a decision. "All right. Thank you. What's your name?" "Lisa Chen." Across the room, Richard was holding court again, retelling his performance with embellishments. Someone in his group noticed Lisa speaking with the coordinator and pointed. Richard turned to look, and his expression shifted from curiosity to amusement as the coordinator announced that there would be one more performance. Lisa walked toward the piano, her legs feeling disconnected from her body. The crowd parted for her, some people looking curious, others looking skeptical. She could feel Richard's eyes on her, could practically hear his thoughts. This should be entertaining. Watching this nobody make a fool of herself. She reached the piano bench and sat down, her simple dress a stark contrast to Richard's expensive tuxedo had been. Her hands moved to the keys but didn't touch them yet. She took a deep breath, trying to calm her racing heart. Behind her, she heard Richard's voice, low but intentionally audible. "This should be interesting. I give her 10 seconds before she realizes she's in over her head." His group laughed softly. The sound of it lit something fierce inside Lisa's chest. She placed her fingers on the keys, closed her eyes, and let everything else fall away. The first chord of Rachmaninoff's Prelude in C-sharp minor rang out through the hall, and Lisa felt the vibration travel up through her fingers, through her arms, settling somewhere deep in her chest. It had been so long since she'd played on an instrument like this. The Steinway responded to her touch with a richness she'd almost forgotten existed. In her mind, she was no longer in this grand hall surrounded by wealthy strangers who'd made her feel small all evening. She was 16 again, sitting in the practice room at her high school playing this same piece over and over until her teacher finally nodded with approval. She was 12, discovering Rachmaninoff for the first time and feeling like she'd found a secret language that spoke directly to her soul. She was 8, her mother sitting in a folding chair in their tiny apartment, eyes closed, listening to her practice with a smile on her tired face. The music poured out of her, each note precise but not mechanical, technical but full of emotion. Her right hand sang out the melody while her left hand provided the deep, resonant foundation that gave the piece its dramatic weight. The famous descending pattern that opened the piece filled the room like a dark waterfall, each note distinct but flowing into the next with perfect timing. Around her, the crowd had gone completely silent. The conversation stopped mid-sentence. The clinking of glasses ceased. Even the waitstaff had frozen in place, trays held aloft, captured by what they were hearing. Lisa's body moved with the music, swaying slightly as the dynamic shifted, leaning into the forte passages and pulling back for the piano sections. Her fingers flew across the keys for the rapid sections, then slowed to draw out the lyrical moments. This was why she played, not for applause or recognition, but for this feeling, this connection between her heart and her hands and the instrument and the music itself. Rachel stood near the back of the crowd, her hand over her mouth, tears forming in her eyes. She'd known Lisa played piano, of course. They'd talked about it over coffee dozens of times. But she'd never heard her friend play, had never understood the depth of her talent. Now watching Lisa transform that piano into something alive, something breathing and speaking, Rachel understood why her friend had turned down every opportunity to leave the community center. Why she'd chosen to teach kids who couldn't pay for lessons over pursuing her own performing career. At the front of his group, Richard's smug expression had vanished. His face had gone pale, his mouth slightly open. He looked like a man watching his entire worldview crumble in real time. The people around him were equally transfixed, and none of them were looking at him anymore. They couldn't look away from Lisa. The piece built toward its powerful climax, and Lisa threw everything into it. Her whole body engaged in the performance now, her shoulders rising and falling with the music's breath, her foot working the pedals to sustain and release notes at exactly the right moments. The Steinway sang under her hands, producing tones so rich and full that they seemed to fill every corner of the vast hall. She reached the section where the left hand had to leap across the keyboard, while the right hand maintained the melody. This was where amateur players often fumbled, where the coordination required became almost inhuman. Lisa's hands moved with absolute confidence, her years of practice making the impossible look effortless. An older man near the front, himself a pianist by the look of recognition on his face, shook his head in amazement. He'd played this piece before. He knew exactly how difficult it was, how many hours of practice each passage required, how easy it was to make mistakes. Watching Lisa play it without a single error, with this level of emotional depth and technical precision, was like watching someone speak fluently in a language he'd only ever stuttered through. The piece began its descent toward the ending, the music growing quieter but no less intense. Lisa's touch on the keys became lighter, more delicate, but every note remained perfectly clear. The famous three-note pattern that had opened the piece returned, now softer, transformed by everything that had come before. In the back corner, a woman who'd been dismissive of Lisa earlier felt ashamed. She'd judged this young woman based on her clothes, her lack of expensive accessories, her quiet demeanor. She'd assumed that someone dressed so simply, someone who taught at a community center instead of a prestigious institution, couldn't possibly be truly talented. The music washing over her now proved how wrong she'd been, how much she'd been willing to overlook based on the most superficial observations. Lisa's hands slowed as she approached the final measures. The last chord came and she held it, her foot on the sustain pedal, letting the notes ring out until they faded naturally into silence. The vibrations continued even after the sound had gone, as if the piano itself was reluctant to let the music end. For several seconds, nobody moved. The silence that followed the performance was as complete as the silence during it had been. Lisa sat at the piano, her hands still resting on the keys, her eyes still closed. She was afraid to open them, afraid to return to reality where she was still just an outsider at a fancy event, where people like Richard would always have the power and the platform regardless of talent. Then the applause started. It began with one person, then spread like wildfire through the crowd. Within seconds, the entire room was clapping, and then people were standing, rising from their seats and positions around the room. A standing ovation. For her, Lisa opened her eyes disoriented. The sound was overwhelming. She turned on the bench, seeing all these well-dressed people on their feet, applauding with genuine enthusiasm. Some were shouting "Brava!" Others were wiping tears from their eyes. The coordinator was beaming, clapping so hard her hands must have hurt. Rachel pushed through the crowd and reached Lisa first, pulling her friend into a tight hug. "You never told me," she whispered. "You never told me you could play like that. You never asked," Lisa said, and they both laughed through their tears. The crowd pressed in, people wanting to shake her hand, to congratulate her, to ask questions. Where had she trained? Who was her teacher? Where did she perform? Would she give them her card? "I teach at the Westside Community Center," Lisa said over and over. Each time she saw the same surprise on people's faces, the same recalculation. How could someone this talented be working at a community center? An elderly woman in an elegant silver dress clasped Lisa's hands. "That was extraordinary. I've been attending concerts for 60 years, and that was one of the finest performances of that piece I've ever heard." "Your teacher must be very proud." "My first teacher was my mother," Lisa said. "She worked 3 jobs to afford a piano for me. She died when I was 17. The woman's eyes filled with tears. "She would be so proud of you tonight." A man in an expensive suit pressed his business card into Lisa's hand. "I'm on the board of the City Symphony. We're always looking for talented soloists. Please call me." Another card followed from someone else, and another. Through the crowd, Lisa caught sight of Richard. He stood apart from his group now, alone, staring at her with an expression she couldn't quite read. Shock, definitely. Maybe embarrassment. Possibly anger. His friends had abandoned him. Drawn to Lisa like everyone else, wanting to be part of this moment. To claim they'd been there when this unknown teacher had delivered such a stunning performance. The coordinator appeared at Lisa's side, glowing with relief and excitement. "Ms. Chen, that was absolutely incredible. I can't thank you enough for saving our evening. I'd love to talk to you about possibly performing at future academy events, and perhaps giving a master class to our students." Lisa nodded, still overwhelmed. A master class at Riverside Music Academy. A month ago, she would have laughed at the idea. Now here was the coordinator, someone who'd been skeptical of her just minutes before, treating her like she was exactly the kind of prestigious performer the academy wanted to associate with. "I should mention," the coordinator continued, lowering her voice, "several major donors have asked about you. I think there may be interest in supporting your work at the community center." "If you're open to that," Lisa's heart skipped. Support for the community center. New instruments, repairs, maybe even a salary for a second teacher. "I'm very open to that," she managed to say. A tall man with white hair approached, and the crowd parted for him automatically. Lisa recognized him from the board member photos Rachel had shown her. David Walsh, the academy's chairman. He looked kind, with deep smile lines around his eyes. "Miss Chen," he said, taking her hand gently. "That was a gift. Thank you for sharing it with us." He paused, studying her face. "Rachel mentioned you teach at the Westside Community Center. That's the program that serves primarily low-income families, correct?" "Yes, sir." "How many students do you have?" 42 right now. We have a waiting list of over 100, but we don't have enough instruments or teaching hours to take them all." David nodded slowly. "What if we change that? What if we made sure every child on that waiting list could get lessons?" Lisa's breath caught. "That would be incredible, but the funding—" "Let me worry about the funding," he smiled. "You just keep doing what you do. Keep teaching those kids. Keep playing like you did tonight. That's what matters." Across the room, Richard finally moved. He walked stiffly toward the exit, his face red, his shoulders hunched. One of his former companions tried to speak to him, but he brushed past without responding. The man who'd held court all evening, who'd spoken so confidently about standards and proper training and natural talent, couldn't get out of the room fast enough. Lisa watched him go and felt not triumph but sadness. He'd been so certain of his superiority, so confident that worth could be measured by wealth and pedigree. The music had proven him wrong, but she suspected he'd learned nothing from it. People like Richard rarely did. A photographer from the local arts magazine asked if he could take her picture by the piano. A reporter wanted to interview her about her background and her teaching philosophy. The woman in the red dress who'd spoken to Lisa earlier approached, looking embarrassed. "I owe you an apology," she said quietly. "I was dismissive earlier. I made assumptions I shouldn't have made." "It happens," Lisa said, and meant it. She'd dealt with assumptions her whole life. The evening continued, but the energy had completely changed. Lisa was no longer the outsider, no longer invisible. People wanted to talk to her, to hear her story, to understand how someone so talented had ended up teaching in a neighborhood most of them had never visited. Rachel stayed close, proud and protective, making sure her friend had water and wasn't getting too overwhelmed. "You okay?" she kept asking. "I think so," Lisa said. "It's just a lot. You deserve this, all of it. You should have had this years ago." But Lisa wasn't so sure. If she'd pursued the performing career everyone had expected, if she'd taken the Juilliard scholarship and followed the traditional path, would she have found this same fulfillment? Would she have known the joy of watching a 7-year-old play their first complete song? Of seeing a teenager discover they had talent they never knew existed? She looked around the room at all these wealthy people, so eager to support her now that they'd seen what she could do. It was funny how that worked. Sad maybe, but funny. The same people who'd ignored her an hour ago now treated her like she was precious. As the crowd around Lisa continued to buzz with excitement, she found herself back at the piano. Not sitting at the bench this time, but standing beside it, her hand resting lightly on the polished surface. The wood was warm under her palm, as if the instrument itself had been affected by the music they'd made together. David Walsh was speaking with a small group of donors nearby, and she caught fragments of their conversation. Funding, long-term support, sustainability, words that could change everything for her students. But another part of her mind was already moving past the Rachmaninoff, feeling the urge to play again, not because anyone expected it, not to prove anything more, but simply because she wanted to. "Would you play something else?" The question came from a young girl, maybe 10 or 11 years old, wearing a dark blue dress that matched her mother's. She looked up at Lisa with wide eyes. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. I take piano lessons, but I can't play like that. Not even close." Lisa knelt down to the girl's level. "How long have you been playing?" 2 years. "But I'm not very good. My teacher says I need to practice more, but it's boring. The songs in my book aren't pretty like what you played." "What's your name?" "Sophia." "Well, Sophia, I have a secret for you. When I was your age, I thought practice was boring too. The scales, the exercises, they seemed pointless. But you know what? They're like vegetables. Not always fun, but they make you strong enough to do the fun stuff later." Sophia giggled. "My mom says that about broccoli." "Your mom's a smart woman." Lisa stood up and looked at Sophia's mother, who nodded permission. "Want to hear something different? Something a little more fun than Rachmaninoff?" "Yes, please." Lisa sat back down at the bench, and the crowd, which had started to disperse into conversations, grew quiet again. Even people who'd begun drifting toward the doors stopped and turned back. Her fingers found the keys, and this time she didn't play classical music. Instead, she launched into a jazz improvisation, starting with a familiar melody that most people in the room would recognize, then transforming it, bending it, adding unexpected harmonies and rhythms. Her left hand laid down a walking bass line while her right hand danced through variations on the theme. The music was playful now, lighter than the Rachmaninoff, but no less skilled. She threw in a little ragtime, some blues progressions, hints of boogie-woogie. The Steinway adapted to this new style beautifully, its clear tone perfect for the intricate runs and syncopated rhythms. Sophia's face lit up, and she started swaying to the music. Other people began tapping their feet, nodding their heads. This was music that made you want to move, that reminded you that piano wasn't just about serious concert halls and formal performances. It could be joyful, spontaneous, alive. Lisa glanced up while playing and saw different expressions on people's faces now. The classical performance had awed them, impressed them, maybe intimidated them a little. This was different. This made them smile. This reminded them why they loved music in the first place. She transitioned seamlessly into another melody. This one original, something she'd been playing around with at home. She'd never performed it for anyone before, had barely even thought of it as a complete piece. But here now, with this incredible instrument under her hands, it flowed out naturally. The melody was wistful and hopeful at the same time, speaking to something universal about human experience, longing and joy mixed together. When she finished, the applause was different too. Warmer, more personal. Sophia clapped the hardest of anyone, jumping up and down. "That was amazing," the girl exclaimed. "Can you teach me to do that?" "Someday, maybe." If you keep practicing those boring scales. Lisa winked. Sophia's mother approached, pulling out her phone. I know this is probably asking too much, but is there any way my daughter could take lessons from you? I don't care about the cost. After hearing you play, I can't imagine having anyone else teach her. Lisa felt the familiar tug in her chest. I teach at the Westside Community Center. We have a waiting list, but I'll pay whatever you ask for private lessons, at your convenience. We can come to you. It wasn't the first time Lisa had gotten this offer. Wealthy parents discovered her somehow, usually through word of mouth, and offered substantial money for private lessons for their children. She always said no. Her time went to the community center, to the kids who couldn't afford any lessons at all, let alone expensive private instruction. But looking at Sophia's eager face, at her mother's hopeful expression, Lisa felt conflicted. Why should this child miss out just because her family had money? She was clearly genuinely interested, not forced into lessons by ambitious parents, and the money could help support Lisa's work at the center. Let me think about it, Lisa said finally. Talk to Rachel Martinez. She works for the academy. She'll have my contact information. Sophia's mother thanked her profusely and led her daughter away, already pulling Rachel aside to get details. An older man approached next. He'd been standing slightly apart from the main crowd all evening, and Lisa recognized him from somewhere, though she couldn't place where. He had kind eyes and moved with the careful deliberation of someone dealing with arthritis or an old injury. Miss Chen, I'm Robert Harrison. I teach at the university's music department. That's where she knew him from. He was something of a legend in the local music education community. Students who studied with him often went on to successful careers as performers and teachers. It's an honor to meet you, Lisa said, meaning it. The honor is mine. That Rachmaninoff prelude was one of the finest performances I've heard in years. Professional orchestras would be lucky to have you as a guest soloist. He paused. But that's not what I wanted to talk to you about. Lisa waited, curious. I was impressed by your performance, obviously, but I was more impressed by what you did just now with that little girl. The way you spoke to her, encouraged her. Teaching is a gift as important as performing, maybe more so. We can always use someone with your skills and your heart on our faculty. Have you ever considered teaching at the university level? Lisa blinked. A university position, steady salary, benefits, prestige, serious musicians to work with instead of children struggling through their first scales. It was the kind of offer she'd imagined getting years ago, before she'd chosen a different path. I'm flattered, Professor Harrison, really, but I'm committed to my work at the community center. I understand, and I respect that choice deeply. He pulled out his card. But if you ever change your mind, or if you'd like to do some guest lectures, master classes, anything like that, please call me. We'd be fortunate to have you in any capacity. She took the card, adding it to the growing collection in her hand. Her simple clutch purse couldn't hold them all. Rachel reappeared, practically glowing. Lisa, you're not going to believe this. David Walsh just told me he's setting up a foundation to fund the community center's music program, fully funded. New instruments, building repairs, salaries for additional teachers, everything. He's talking about a 10-year commitment. Lisa's legs suddenly felt weak. She grabbed Rachel's arm for support. 10 years? 10 years. Guaranteed funding. You'll be able to take every kid on that waiting list and then some. Rachel's voice cracked with emotion. You did this. Your performance tonight, it moved him. It moved everyone. I just played piano, Lisa said, dazed. You did a lot more than that. The evening continued in a blur. More conversations, more business cards, more offers of support and collaboration. A local news station wanted to do a story on her. An arts blogger wanted to write a profile. The symphony orchestra's director wanted to discuss a possible collaboration between the orchestra and the community center, bringing professional musicians to perform for and work with Lisa's students. Through it all, Lisa kept thinking about her kids at the center, about 7-year-old Tommy who practiced on a keyboard at home because his family couldn't afford a real piano, about 15-year-old Jasmine who discovered she could escape her chaotic home life by losing herself in music, about all the children whose lives were quietly being transformed by access to something as simple and profound as piano lessons. She thought about her mother, too. About watching her work herself to exhaustion so Lisa could have opportunities she'd never had. About the day her mother brought home that old upright piano, probably spending money they desperately needed for other things. About her mother's face when Lisa played her first recital. Pride and love and exhaustion all mixed together. I wish you could see this, Mom, Lisa whispered to herself. What was that? Rachel asked. Nothing. Just thinking. As the evening wound down, guests began leaving, but many stopped to speak with Lisa one more time before they left, to thank her, to encourage her, to tell her how her performance had moved them. The woman in the red dress who'd apologized earlier pressed a check into Lisa's hand. For the community center, she said. It's not much, but I wanted to contribute something. Lisa looked at the check. $5,000, not much. Thank you, she managed to say. This will help so many kids. After the woman left, more people approached with checks, with pledges, with promises of support. By the time the last guest departed, Lisa had commitments totaling over $100,000 for the community center's programs, not counting the major foundation David Walsh was establishing. Finally, mercifully, the hall was quiet. The waitstaff cleaned up around them as Lisa and Rachel sat together at a small table, exhausted. I can't believe that just happened, Lisa said. I can. I knew you were good. I didn't know you were that good, but I knew you were special. Rachel squeezed her friend's hand. This is going to change everything, you know. I know. You okay with that? Lisa thought about it. Change was scary. The quiet anonymity of her work at the community center had been comfortable, safe. Now people knew who she was, had expectations. The foundation money would be wonderful, but it would come with oversight, with board meetings, with politics. But she thought about the waiting list, about all those kids who wanted to learn, who had potential no one else believed in, just like she'd had potential people hadn't believed in until tonight. Yeah, she said finally. I'm okay with that. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, then Rachel said, Did you see Richard's face when you were playing? I tried not to look. He looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. He left before you even finished, didn't say goodbye to anyone. I almost feel bad for him, Lisa said. Almost? Almost. They laughed together, the kind of laughter that comes after intense experiences, when your body needs to release all the built-up tension and emotion. The coordinator approached one last time. Miss Chen, I just wanted to thank you again. And to give you this. She handed Lisa an envelope. It's the performer's fee. The same amount we were going to pay Maestro Chen. Lisa opened the envelope and nearly dropped it. The check inside was for $10,000. I can't accept this, she stammered. You earned it. You saved our event and you gave our guests a performance they'll talk about for years. Please take it. Lisa looked at Rachel, who nodded encouragingly. Buy yourself something nice for once, Rachel said. Or put it toward the center. Whatever you want. You deserve it. The check felt heavy in Lisa's hands. $10,000 for a single performance. She'd been working at the community center for 5 years and had never made anywhere close to that much money in a year, let alone a night. Thank you, she said to the coordinator. Thank you so much. Walking out of the Riverside Music Academy that night felt like stepping between two different worlds. Behind her was the marble and crystal, the evening gowns and champagne, the life she'd glimpsed but never really wanted. Ahead was her beat-up Honda Civic in the parking lot. The drive back to her small apartment, the life she'd chosen. Rachel walked with her, both of them carrying their shoes now, feet aching from hours in heels. The night air was cool and welcome after the warmth of the crowded hall. You know everything's different now, right? Rachel said as they reached Lisa's car. I know. I mean, really different. David Walsh doesn't do small gestures. If he's setting up a foundation, he means business. Your community center is about to become a model program. People are going to be watching, studying what you do, trying to replicate it. Lisa leaned against her car, looking up at the stars barely visible through the city lights. Is that what you want? The attention, the responsibility, all of it. I want my kids to have good instruments to play on. I want them to have more than one teacher so nobody's waiting months for lessons. I want the roof to stop leaking and the heating to work properly. If that comes with attention and responsibility, I'll deal with it. Rachel smiled. You're going to be amazing. You already are. They hugged goodbye, and Lisa drove home through quiet streets, her mind replaying the evening in fragments. Richard's dismissive comments. The feel of that perfect Steinway under her fingers. The crowd rising to their feet. Sophia's excited face. The stack of business cards and checks in her purse. Her apartment was dark and quiet when she got home. She kicked off her shoes, hung up her dress, and sat down at her old upright piano in yoga pants and a t-shirt. The keys were slightly stiff, the tone nowhere near as pure as the Steinway, but this piano had been with her for over a decade. It was familiar, comfortable, home. She played softly, not wanting to disturb her neighbors, just letting her fingers wander across the keys. No Rachmaninoff now, no performances. Just simple melodies, the kind she played when she needed to think. Her phone buzzed. A text from her brother. "Rachel just called me. What? Why didn't you tell me you were playing at some fancy gala?" Lisa smiled and typed back. "It wasn't planned. Long story. Call you tomorrow." More texts came in. A former classmate who'd somehow heard about it already. A reporter wanting to set up an interview. Professor Harrison confirming lunch next week to discuss possibilities. The messages kept coming, and Lisa eventually turned off her phone. She thought about her mother as she often did when important things happened. Her mother had died 3 months before Lisa's Juilliard audition, and without her there pushing and believing, Lisa had lost her nerve. She'd turned down the scholarship, enrolled in the local state university instead, studied music education rather than performance. Everyone had called it a waste, a tragedy. Throwing away such an opportunity, but was it? If she'd gone to Juilliard, she'd probably be competing for orchestra positions now, or teaching at some prestigious school, working with students who already had every advantage. She wouldn't have met Tommy or Jasmine or the dozens of other kids whose lives she'd touched. Would that have been better? More successful? Success was funny that way. Richard measured it in performance venues and famous teachers and expensive instruments. David Walsh probably measured it in endowment funds and prestigious board positions. For Lisa, success looked like a 10-year-old playing her first complete song, like a teenager discovering she had talent worth developing, like making music accessible to kids who'd been told, implicitly or explicitly, that classical music wasn't for people like them. She played for another hour, letting the day settle into her bones, becoming part of her story rather than something that had happened to her. Finally exhausted, she went to bed. The next morning, Lisa woke to her phone buzzing constantly. She'd forgotten to leave it off. Messages, missed calls, emails. A local news station wanted her on their morning show. An arts magazine wanted a feature profile. Parents from the community center wanting to congratulate her, asking if the rumors about new funding were true. She made coffee and sat at her small kitchen table, trying to process it all. Through her window, she could see the neighborhood waking up. The corner store opening. Kids heading to the bus stop. The ordinary rhythm of life that had nothing to do with galas and standing ovations. Her phone rang. An unknown number. She almost didn't answer, but something made her pick up. "Miss Chen? This is Richard Pemberton." Lisa nearly dropped her phone. She said nothing, waiting. "I wanted to call and..." He paused, and she could hear him struggling. "I wanted to apologize for my behavior last night. It was inappropriate and presumptuous. You're clearly an exceptional musician, and I had no right to speak to you the way I did." The apology sounded stiff, rehearsed, like something he'd practiced. But there was something else underneath it. Genuine embarrassment, maybe.